Call the cops! That black kid is stealing from our mailboxes! He's casing the neighborhood! I saw him! Karen Davis's piercing voice shattered the calm of Oakwood Estates, echoing down the pristine street lined with million-dollar homes. "Somebody stop him before he breaks into a house," she screamed, waving her phone wildly, already recording, her words sharp enough to cut through the afternoon air. Neighbors froze, curtains shifted, doors cracked open. Within seconds, whispers spread along Oakwood Drive like wildfire. One small boy's quiet afternoon had turned into chaos. Before we dive into this shocking story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our powerful real-life stories. Now, let's begin. Alex Thompson was only 8 years old, a bright, curious black boy with big dreams and an even bigger heart. That afternoon, he wandered near the community mailbox carrying his tiny silver telescope, a gift from his late father, an Air Force pilot who died 2 years ago. To Alex, it wasn't just a telescope, it was his magic eye, his way of chasing the stars his father once taught him about. But to Karen Davis, their 48-year-old neighbor across the street, Alex wasn't a little boy exploring, he was a threat. Karen had been watching from her second-floor window for weeks, her life consumed by bitterness since a painful divorce 8 months earlier. Nights spent scrolling through online forums filled her mind with fear-driven stories about suspicious activity in wealthy neighborhoods. Every sound outside her window became a warning sign. Every unfamiliar face was danger. So when she spotted Alex kneeling near the mailbox, sketching in his science notebook, holding up a small stone to examine it through his telescope, Karen didn't see innocence. She saw a criminal scouting targets. Without a second thought, she stormed outside, her sandals slapping the pavement, voice cutting through the warm California air. "Hey, what do you think you're doing out here?" Alex startled, spinning around, his small hands tightening around the telescope. I found this cool rock," he said softly, his voice shaking but polite. "It looks like a meteorite." He held up the tiny quartz, proud of his discovery. But Karen's face hardened instantly. She yanked the stone from his palm and snapped. "You don't belong here. Where are your parents?" Her tone was sharp, dripping with accusation. Alex hesitated, nervous under her glare. "My mom's, she's home," he stammered, accidentally giving the wrong house number. 321 instead of 312. Karen's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, so you don't even know where you live?" she spat, pulling out her phone. "That's it. I'm calling the police." With one hand on her hip and the other holding her phone like a weapon, she hit record and dialed 911. "Yes," she said loudly, her voice deliberate, knowing Alex could hear every word. "I'm reporting a suspicious black juvenile. He's tampering with mailboxes, using some strange device, and possibly destroying property." Alex's chest tightened as the words sank in. He wasn't destroying anything. He wasn't even near anyone's mail. But her voice made him guilty before he could explain. On the other end, Susan Clark, the 911 dispatcher, recognized the address instantly, close to Laura Thompson's home, the new Orange County police chief. Susan tried to reach Laura, but her phone was silenced during a critical city council meeting on police reform. Meanwhile, Karen paced the sidewalk, her camera trained on Alex, narrating her twisted version of events. "This is what we have to deal with now," she declared. "Kids casing houses, pretending to play, and no parents anywhere. Disgraceful." Alex clutched his telescope tighter, his knuckles white, his voice trembling. "I didn't do anything," he whispered, but Karen sneered. "Don't act innocent. People like you don't just look at rocks." The words pierced deeper than she knew. Tears blurred Alex's vision as his hands shook. Then, without warning, The telescope slipped from his grip and crashed onto the pavement with a sharp, echoing crack. The glass lens shattered, scattering pieces across the sidewalk like broken stars. Alex gasped, dropping to his knees, scooping up the fragments with shaking fingers. That telescope wasn't just an object. It was his father's memory, his connection to the nights they spent tracing constellations together. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to see the stars." But Karen didn't stop. She stepped closer, her phone inches from his tear-streaked face, her voice colder than ever. "Stop pretending," she hissed. "You people think we're stupid. But I see what you're doing. Across the street, Mr. Wilson, an elderly neighbor who'd lived in Oakwood Estates for 40 years, opened his door and stepped outside. His voice, though calm, carried authority. 'Karen,' he said firmly, 'he's just a child. Leave him alone.' But Karen spun on him, pointing sharply toward Alex. 'You don't get it. Harold, first. They scout the area, then the break-ins start. Haven't you seen the news? A few houses down, Mrs. Garcia, a single mother of 2, rushed out and knelt beside Alex, gently putting a protective hand on his shoulder. 'Karen, stop this,' she said firmly. 'I've seen this boy. He walks to school every morning with his little telescope. He's not hurting anyone.' But Karen ignored her, keeping the camera rolling, determined to make Alex look guilty. Behind them, blinds shifted, more neighbors gathered, whispering to one another, unsure of what to believe. Some stood frozen, siding silently with Karen out of fear. Others looked horrified, watching a little boy's innocence dissolve before their eyes. Alex's small hands fumbled with his smartwatch, trying desperately to call his mom, but his fingers trembled so violently that he kept missing the button. "Mom, please," he whispered, chest heaving, voice so faint it barely carried over the growing tension. In that moment, Oakwood Drive felt heavier than the summer heat pressing down on it. Karen's accusations were about to escalate further. Police cars would arrive, neighbors would take sides, and the peaceful facade of Oakwood Estates, this so-called perfect community, was about to shatter forever. But Alex didn't know that yet. All he knew was that his telescope was broken, his heart was racing, and the stars, the ones he loved so much, suddenly felt impossibly far away. The sun hung low over Oakwood Estates, casting soft golden light across the quiet street as Alex Thompson pedaled his small blue bike around the cul-de-sac, his backpack bouncing lightly against his shoulders. His science notebook was tucked safely inside, along with a few tiny quartz stones he'd found during recess. Today had been special, his first meeting with the school's science club, and he couldn't wait to share his discoveries with his new friend, Jake, after saying goodbye at the corner. Alex rode past the community mailbox on Oakwood Drive, scanning the ground carefully for what he liked to call earthbound stars, little fragments of glittering rock he imagined had fallen from the night sky. Spotting a small sparkle near the curb, he hopped off, crouched down, and pulled out his silver telescope, carefully adjusting the tiny lens his father had once shown him how to use. He smiled quietly to himself, imagining his dad's voice explaining constellations, planets, and meteors for Alex. This was more than just a rock hunt. It was his way of holding on to his father's memory. But from across the street, Karen Davis's blinds parted sharply, and her suspicious eyes locked onto him like a spotlight. Her body tensed instantly, years of personal pain and online paranoia feeding into one single thought: danger. She'd been watching the Thompsons since the day they moved in 3 weeks ago. Something about them, a young black boy, a single mother, a police chief at that, unsettled her in ways she couldn't name, and today she believed she finally had proof. To Karen, Alex kneeling near the mailbox with a telescope looked like something else entirely. There it is. she muttered under her breath, heart pounding as she grabbed her phone, caught in the act. Within seconds, she stormed out of her front door, her sandals slapping against the pavement as she shouted, "Hey, what are you doing over there?" Alex startled, nearly dropping his telescope, spinning around to face her. I found this cool rock," he said softly, holding up the sparkling stone, his voice polite but unsure. "It looks like a meteorite." Karen's expression hardened, suspicion tightening every muscle in her face. She closed the distance quickly, towering over him, her voice sharp enough to slice the warm afternoon air. "You don't belong here." "Where are your parents?" she demanded, snatching the stone from his small hand before he could answer. Alex's throat tightened as his grip on the telescope grew shaky. "My mom's home. We live right there," he stammered nervously, pointing toward his house but accidentally giving the wrong number. 321 instead of 312. That single slip fed Karen's paranoia like gasoline on fire. "Oh, so you don't even know your own address?" she sneered, whipping out her phone. "That's it. I'm calling the police." Alex's eyes widened, his little chest rising and falling faster now. "I didn't do anything," he whispered, his voice breaking. But Karen was already speaking into her phone, pacing in small circles as she recorded him on video. "Yes. 911, she said loudly enough for Alex to hear every syllable. "There's a suspicious black juvenile tampering with mailboxes. He has some kind of device. I think he's destroying property." Her words sliced through him like a blade. Alex clutched his telescope to his chest, tears brimming in his wide brown eyes. He wasn't destroying anything. He wasn't even touching the mail, but the way she spoke made him feel like a criminal in his own neighborhood, on the other end of the line. Dispatcher Susan Clark recognized the address immediately, the new home of Chief Laura Thompson, but couldn't reach Laura. Laura's phone sat face down and silent inside a tense city council chamber where she was presenting on police reform. Meanwhile, Karen circled Alex slowly, holding her phone high, narrating her twisted version of events as though she were starring in her own live broadcast. "This is what's happening now," she declared into the camera. "Kids casing houses, pretending to play, and nobody watching them. It's dangerous." Alex backed away slowly, whispering, "I'm not dangerous," clutching the telescope tighter and tighter until his small hands trembled violently. Then, it slipped. A sharp crack echoed through the street as the telescope hit the pavement, the glass lens splintering into jagged shards that glittered beneath the fading sunlight. Alex gasped, dropping to his knees instantly, his shaking fingers gathering the broken pieces like precious treasure. That telescope wasn't just an object, it was the last gift his father ever gave him, his connection to the nights they'd spent tracing constellations together in the backyard before everything changed. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling with heartbreak. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to see the stars." But Karen's voice only grew colder. Her camera angled sharply down at him as though she were capturing evidence. "Stop pretending," she hissed. "I've seen this before. You people think you're clever, but you're not fooling anyone. Across the street, Mr. Wilson, the elderly neighbor who had lived in Oakwood Estates for 4 decades, opened his door and stepped outside, leaning heavily on his cane. 'Karen,' he called out firmly, his voice carrying despite its softness. 'He's just a boy. Leave him alone.' But Karen turned sharply toward him, her voice rising. 'You don't get it. Harold! First they scout the area, then the break-ins start. Haven't you seen the news?' Her tone sent ripples through the street, pulling more neighbors to their windows and front porches. A few houses down, Mrs. Garcia, a single mother with 2 young children, stepped out and hurried to Alex's side, kneeling protectively beside him. 'Karen.' 'That's enough,' she said, her voice steady and strong. 'I've seen this boy. He walks to school every morning with his little telescope. He's not hurting anyone? But Karen wasn't listening. Her phone was still recording, her words spinning a narrative louder than the truth. Behind them, blinds twitched and curtains shifted as whispers spread from house to house. Some neighbors stood frozen, unsure of what to believe. Others glanced at one another, shaking their heads in silent disbelief. Alex pulled his smartwatch closer, struggling to dial his mom's number, but his trembling hands failed him again and again. "Mom, please," he whispered, tears falling onto the cracked pavement. His voice was so faint, so fragile, it barely carried over the growing tension surrounding him. For the first time in his young life, Alex felt the weight of being judged not by who he was, but by what someone decided to see. A perfect afternoon had unraveled into fear, shame, and heartbreak, and the real storm hadn't even begun. Karen's voice rose again, loud and shrill, pulling more neighbors into the unfolding scene. Patrol cars were already on the way, lines were being drawn in the sand, and soon, Oakwood Estates, this perfect, polished neighborhood, would never be the same again. Alex crouched low behind a small hedge near the mailbox, his little knees drawn up to his chest, hugging his cracked telescope tightly as though it could still protect him. His heart raced so fast he could feel it pounding in his ears, drowning out the murmurs of neighbors gathering nearby. Through blurred tears, he tried tapping his smartwatch again, his trembling fingers struggling to hit the right button. "Mom, please," he whispered shakily, his small voice breaking under the weight of panic. But Karen Davis wasn't done. Standing in the center of the street, phone raised high, she narrated into the camera as though she were exposing a dangerous criminal. "There he is," she said loudly, pointing directly at Alex. "Caught red-handed. You see this? Tampering with mailboxes, using some weird device, casing our homes. And look, now he's hiding because he knows he's guilty." Alex peered over the bush, his wide, tear-filled eyes locking onto hers, his lips trembling as he whispered, "I didn't do anything." But Karen raised her voice further, making sure every neighbor within earshot heard her version of the story. "Don't be fooled by the tears," she shouted. "This is exactly how they trick you. Act innocent. Then they come back when you're not looking, across the street." Mr. Wilson shuffled closer, leaning heavily on his cane, his face pale with frustration. "Karen," he called, his voice firm despite its weakness. "You're making a mistake. That boy's not hurting anyone." But Karen spun on him, her free hand slicing through the air as she snapped. "You don't understand. Harold, I've seen this before. First they play near the mailboxes, then houses start getting broken into. Haven't you read the reports? A few doors down." Mrs. Garcia stormed out of her house, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun, phone in hand, recording Karen right back. "Stop lying," she said sharply, positioning herself between Alex and Karen. "I've seen this boy. He walks past my house every morning on his way to school, always with that little telescope. He's curious, not dangerous. Leave him alone." Karen's eyes narrowed as her phone camera turned toward Mrs. Garcia. "Oh, of course you'd defend him," she said coldly. "People like you always make excuses for this kind of behavior." Gasps rippled through the gathering neighbors, some shaking their heads at Karen's words, others muttering uncomfortably but staying silent. Tension hung heavy in the warm California air, every second stretching longer than the last. Then, in the distance, came the low hum of sirens. 3 patrol cars turned the corner onto Oakwood Drive, their lights flashing red and blue against the pristine white fences and manicured lawns. Officers Carter, Harris, and Miller stepped out, their boots crunching on the pavement, hands resting near their belts. Carter, a 12-year veteran with graying hair and a stern expression, led the way, followed by Harris, calmer but methodical, and Miller, a nervous rookie scanning the scene like he'd stepped into something far bigger than a simple call. Karen rushed toward them immediately, her voice loud and urgent. "Officers, thank God you're here," she said, gesturing wildly toward Alex. "That boy was tampering with mailboxes using some kind of device. I caught him on video. He's hiding because he knows he's guilty." Officer Carter's eyes shifted to Alex, curled up behind the hedge, his small hands clutching his broken telescope, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "Son," Carter said, his voice deep but cautious. "Come out from there." Mrs. Garcia stepped forward quickly. "He didn't do anything," she said firmly. "She's exaggerating. He was just looking at rocks." Karen scoffed loudly, holding up her phone like evidence. "I have everything on video," she snapped. "He even lied about his address. He doesn't even live here." Officer Carter's gaze sharpened. "Is that true? Son? Where do you live?" Alex sniffled hard, his trembling lips struggling to form the words. I live at 321 Oakwood." He stammered again, giving the wrong number for the second time. Karen seized the moment instantly. "See?" she shouted triumphantly. "He doesn't even know where he lives. He's not from here." Officer Harris, quieter and more measured, crouched down so his eyes were level with Alex's. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "Take a deep breath for me. Okay? Can you tell me your mom's name?" Alex wiped his tears with the back of his hand and whispered, Laura Thompson." Harris paused, exchanging a quick glance with Miller, who checked his notepad where the dispatcher's notes were written. Recognition flickered in Harris's eyes. "Chief Thompson," he muttered under his breath, suddenly uneasy. But Karen interrupted before he could ask more. "Don't fall for this," she yelled. "This is exactly how they manipulate you. You have to take him in before he disappears." More neighbors began stepping outside now, drawn by the flashing lights and shouting voices. Some folded their arms, siding with Karen. Others shook their heads, whispering that this had gone too far. It was no longer just about Alex. It was about what Oakwood Estates stood for, and whose voices carried the most weight. Then came the first twist. Mrs. Garcia lowered her phone and crossed her arms tightly. "You want to talk about lies, Karen?" she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Why don't you tell them about Lakeview?" Karen froze, her face paling instantly. Murmurs erupted among the neighbors, curious eyes turning toward her. "What happened in Lakeview?" Officer Carter asked sharply. Mrs. Garcia's voice stayed steady. "Last year, she accused a Latino teenager of breaking into her old neighborhood's clubhouse, called the police, had him handcuffed in front of his parents. Guess what? He was the maintenance worker's son. He was there fixing a leak." Karen's face flushed deep red, her grip on her phone tightening. "That has nothing to do with this," she snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of growing judgment. "It has everything to do with this," Mrs. Garcia shot back. "This isn't the first time you've made up stories. You're doing it again, and this time, you're traumatizing a child." More gasps came from the neighbors, some shifting uncomfortably, others lowering their phones as uncertainty spread like wildfire. Officer Miller, still new but observant, spoke softly to Carter. "Sir, maybe we should verify the details before we assume anything." But Carter's eyes stayed fixed on Alex, who now clutched his broken telescope like a lifeline, his tiny voice whispering again and again. "I didn't do anything." The tension was unbearable. Neighbors divided, phones recording, accusations flying, and Alex, the smallest person there, stood at the center of it all, caught between fear and disbelief. None of them knew that at that very moment. Miles away, Chief Laura Thompson's phone was buzzing relentlessly on the conference table as Susan Clark, the 911 dispatcher, tried to reach her. One voicemail had already been sent, Alex's shaky voice saying, "Mom, a mean lady called the police. I'm scared." Laura hadn't heard it yet, but when she did, Oakwood Drive would never be the same again. Officer Carter's voice cut through the tense silence as he stepped closer to Alex, his brows furrowed and his tone firm. "Son, I need you to tell me exactly what you were doing at the mailbox," he said, hands resting on his duty belt. Alex's small fingers fidgeted with the broken telescope clutched tightly against his chest, his wide brown eyes brimming with fear. I was just looking at a rock," he whispered, his voice so soft it barely carried over the murmurs of the gathered neighbors. "I wasn't touching the mail. I wasn't doing anything bad. But Karen Davis, standing just a few feet away, waved her phone like a flag of authority, her voice sharp and commanding. "Don't believe him! I saw everything!" she shouted, angling her camera directly at Alex's tear-streaked face. He was using some kind of device, probably trying to break into the boxes. Kids like this know exactly what they're doing. "Mrs." Garcia stepped forward instantly, her voice steady and strong as she shielded Alex with her arm. "That's a telescope. Karen, not a device," she said sharply. He was looking at shiny rocks, not stealing mail. "You need to stop," Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically for the benefit of her recording. "Oh, sure, because innocent kids always carry telescopes to mailboxes," she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You people think you can explain everything away, but I know better." Gasps rippled through the crowd as several neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Tension thickened in the warm California air, the quiet perfection of Oakwood Estates unraveling one harsh word at a time. Officer Harris, kneeling down to meet Alex's eye level, kept his voice calm and gentle. "Buddy, can you show me your telescope?" Alex nodded hesitantly, holding out the cracked device with trembling hands. Harris studied it carefully, his brow furrowing as he turned it over, realizing instantly what it was. "This isn't a tool to break into anything," he murmured, glancing subtly at Officer Miller, who stood just behind him. The rookie's shoulders eased slightly, relief softening his tense expression, but before Harris could say more, Karen cut in again, her voice rising like an alarm. "Don't let him trick you!" she shouted, waving her phone wildly. "He lied about his address. Remember? He doesn't even live here!" Officer Carter's eyes sharpened as he turned back to Alex. "Son, where do you live?" he asked firmly. Alex swallowed hard, his tiny shoulders trembling beneath his striped t-shirt. 321 Oakwood. He stammered again, giving the wrong number for the third time. Karen pounced immediately, pointing accusingly at him. "See? He's lying! He doesn't belong here!" Alex's chest rose and fell rapidly, his little voice breaking as he tried again. "I do live here," he whispered, tears streaking his cheeks. "It's the White House with the blue flowers. My mom's name is Laura." Officer Harris exchanged a sharp look with Miller as realization dawned. "Chief Thompson," Harris murmured under his breath, his jaw tightening as the pieces connected. But Carter remained focused on Alex, his skepticism growing. "Who's your mom again?" he pressed. Alex hesitated, his voice trembling. Laura Thompson," he said softly. A hush fell over the officers for just a moment, the weight of that name lingering in the charged air. But Karen broke the silence, her voice slicing through the moment. "Oh, come on," she snapped, throwing her hands up. "Now he's pretending his mom's the police chief?" "What a joke," murmurs spread among the neighbors, some shaking their heads, others pulling out their phones to record. The quiet street was no longer quiet at all. Officer Miller shifted uncomfortably, lowering his voice so only Harris could hear. "Sir," he whispered. "What if he's telling the truth? Maybe we should confirm before this escalates." Harris nodded subtly, but Carter's expression remained stern, his instincts cautious after years of tense calls like this. He crouched lower, his shadow falling over the boy. "Alex," he said firmly, "I need you to look at me. Did you touch any of these mailboxes?" Alex shook his head quickly, clutching the broken telescope to his chest. "No, sir," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I was just looking at rocks." Harris's gaze softened, but before he could speak, Karen stepped forward, practically shoving her phone between them. "Don't be fooled," she insisted, her tone sharp and condescending. "I've seen this before. They act innocent until you turn your back." Her voice carried over the gathering crowd, and some neighbors shifted uneasily, unsure which side to take. Mrs. Garcia planted her hands firmly on her hips, her voice rising above Karen's. "This isn't about safety, Karen. This is about you making assumptions about a child because of what he looks like." The crowd murmured louder now, some siding with Garcia, others avoiding eye contact altogether, unwilling to get involved. Officer Miller glanced nervously at the growing tension, his hand resting lightly on his radio, ready to call for backup if the situation spiraled further. Meanwhile, Alex's smartwatch buzzed faintly against his wrist, and with trembling fingers, he pressed down on the voice command button, a shaky message recorded as he whispered through sobs. "Mom, a mean lady called the police. I'm scared. Please come." The message sent automatically, landing in Laura Thompson's voicemail inbox miles away at City Hall, inside the council chamber. Laura was seated at the head of a long wooden table, surrounded by city officials debating reforms on bias and community policing. Her phone sat face down and silent until the vibration buzzed violently against the wood, lighting up with missed calls and notifications. As the meeting wrapped, she reached for her phone absent-mindedly, intending to check the time, and froze. 15 missed calls, a flood of texts, and one voicemail from Alex. Her pulse quickened as she tapped play, and the sound of her son's trembling voice filled the silent room. "Mom, a mean lady called the police. I'm scared. Please come." The blood drained from Laura's face as she shot up from her chair, heart pounding in her chest. "Excuse me?" she said abruptly, her voice tight as she grabbed her bag and keys, without waiting for questions. She bolted from the chamber, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor as she dialed the station on speed dial. "This is Chief Thompson," she barked the moment an operator picked up. "Patch me through to dispatch. Now. Within seconds." Susan Clark's voice came through the line, steady but urgent. "Chief, we've got a call about a suspicious juvenile at Oakwood Drive," Susan explained. "I tried reaching you earlier. We didn't realize it was Alex until he gave your address." Laura's stomach dropped, her grip tightening around the steering wheel as she sped toward home. "I'm 5 minutes out," she said, her voice controlled but sharp. "Keep me updated. Do not let anyone touch my son. Back on Oakwood Drive." The scene was spiraling faster by the minute. Patrol car lights flashed across polished driveways, neighbors lined the sidewalks, and Karen's voice grew louder with each passing second, demanding Alex be taken in for questioning. Mrs. Garcia's voice cracked as she argued back, defending the trembling boy clutching his shattered telescope. Officer Harris stepped aside, speaking low into his radio, while Miller hovered near Alex, his unease growing with every passing moment. And through it all, Alex sat silent, his small frame shaking, whispering again and again under his breath, "Mom's coming. Mom's coming." None of them knew it yet, but Laura Thompson's arrival would change everything. In less than 5 minutes, Oakwood Drive would erupt into a confrontation no one would ever forget, one that would expose hidden vendettas, buried prejudices, and leave the entire neighborhood forever changed. Laura's black SUV screeched to a halt at the corner of Oakwood Drive, tires crunching against the pavement as the flashing red and blue lights reflected off her windshield. She shoved the gear into park and swung the door open before the engine even fully stopped, her heels hitting the pavement with sharp, deliberate steps. The hum of neighbors whispering quieted instantly, every head turning as she approached. Her uniform wasn't on, Today she was just Laura, wearing a simple navy blouse and slacks. But her presence carried weight, authority, and power. Chief Laura Thompson was home, and the air shifted immediately. Alex spotted her first, the moment his wide, tear-filled eyes met hers. He bolted forward, sobbing, clutching the shattered telescope pieces in his tiny hands. "Mom!" he cried, collapsing into her arms. Laura crouched instantly, wrapping him close, her hand smoothing over his trembling back. "I'm here, baby," she whispered softly, kissing the top of his head, her voice low but steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I've got you. You're safe now." Her calm tone belied the fire raging beneath the surface, and when she stood again, her expression hardened. Scanning the scene, 3 patrol cars, dozens of neighbors, a crowd divided by whispers and tension. Her son's name had been on a dispatch report, labeled suspicious juvenile. That alone burned like acid in her chest. She turned to face the officers, her voice sharp and commanding. "What's going on here?" she demanded, locking eyes with Officer Carter first. He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably under her stare. "Chief, we didn't know it was your son," he admitted awkwardly. "We got a call about a juvenile tampering with mailboxes. Ms. Davis here." He gestured toward Karen, claimed she had video proof. Laura's eyes moved slowly, deliberately, until they landed on Karen Davis, standing rigid in the middle of the street, phone still clutched tightly in her hand. "Is that right?" Laura asked, her tone low but laced with quiet steel. Karen's posture stiffened, her chin tilting upward defensively. "I was protecting my neighborhood," she snapped. "I saw him acting suspicious, kneeling near the mailboxes with some kind of device. I called 911 like any responsible person would." Laura stepped closer, her voice firm but icy. "That device was a telescope," she said flatly, gesturing toward the cracked silver cylinder clutched in Alex's hand. "My son was looking at rocks for his science project." Karen's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out at first. Her grip on her phone faltered, her confidence cracking under the weight of Laura's unwavering stare. Still, she recovered quickly, her voice growing sharper. "How was I supposed to know that?" she countered. "I saw him crouched near the mailboxes, acting suspicious, giving the wrong address. Anyone would have thought the same thing." Laura's jaw tightened as she drew herself up to her full height, her voice carrying now across the silent street. "No, Karen," she said evenly. "Not anyone. You thought that because you didn't see a child. You saw a threat." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, neighbors shifting uncomfortably. Some lowered their phones, shame settling into their expressions. Others glanced at Karen, whispers spreading like wildfire behind cupped hands. Karen's cheeks flushed deep red, but she refused to back down. "Don't turn this around on me," she snapped. "I've lived here for 10 years, and I've seen what happens when you ignore red flags. I wasn't going to let something happen on my watch." Laura's gaze hardened, her voice dropping an octave, deep and steady. "You mean like the time my late husband refused to represent your ex-husband in court?" The words sliced through the air like a blade. Gasps erupted among the neighbors. Karen's composure faltered completely, her jaw tightening, her knuckles white around her phone. "This isn't about that," she stammered, her voice suddenly quieter, thinner. "Oh, but it is," Laura said firmly, stepping closer now, her presence unyielding. "This isn't the first time you've let your personal grudges blind you. Today, you didn't just humiliate my son, you traumatized him, and you called the police on an 8-year-old boy over a rock." Karen's breathing quickened, her defiance fading under the crushing weight of the truth unraveling before the entire neighborhood around them. Neighbors exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others muttering under their breath. A few even stepped closer to Laura and Alex, standing silently at their side. Officer Harris finally spoke, his voice quiet but certain. "Chief, with respect, it's clear now Alex wasn't doing anything wrong," he said, glancing at Karen meaningfully. Rookie Officer Miller nodded quickly in agreement, his nervousness obvious. "Ma'am, we shouldn't have questioned him like that without more information," he admitted softly, guilt flickering in his expression. Laura inhaled deeply, steadying herself before turning back to Alex, brushing the tears from his cheeks with her thumb. "You're okay now," she murmured softly, her voice dropping to the tender register only a mother's could reach. "You didn't do anything wrong. You hear me?" "Nothing." Alex nodded faintly, clinging to her arm, his breathing finally slowing as he buried his face against her blouse. But Laura wasn't finished. She turned sharply back to Karen, her voice ringing out, steady and resolute. "This ends today," she declared. "You don't get to weaponize fear. You don't get to shame a child for existing in his own neighborhood. And you certainly don't get to drag my son's name through the mud without consequence." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but faltered, her bravado crumbling under the weight of dozens of eyes fixed on her, for the first time since the confrontation began. Her phone lowered to her side. She shifted her weight uncomfortably, her shoulders hunched as murmurs rippled louder through the crowd. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she muttered weakly, her tone almost defensive, almost regretful. But Laura's voice remained unrelenting. "You called the police on an 8-year-old boy. Karen," she said evenly. "You made him believe, for even a second, that he was in danger for simply being who he is. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Silence swept over Oakwood Drive like a heavy blanket. Even the flashing lights of the patrol cars seemed muted in that moment. The officers stood quietly, heads slightly bowed, and the neighbors who had gathered closer looked away, ashamed. Alex, still holding the broken telescope in his small hands, sniffled softly against his mother's side. Finally, Officer Carter cleared his throat, his voice subdued, his usual authority gone. "Chief, we'll file a full incident report," he said quietly. "No charges, of course, and I'll personally ensure this doesn't happen again." Laura nodded once, curtly, her attention fixed entirely on Alex now, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. She bent down to meet his eye level, her voice soft and warm. "You're safe," she whispered. "We're going home." Alex looked up at her, his lips quivering as he nodded slowly, gripping the shattered telescope tightly in his little fist. Behind them, Karen stood motionless, her gaze darting nervously from neighbor to neighbor, realizing for the first time just how deeply the ground beneath her had shifted. She wasn't the voice of authority anymore. The weight of the stairs pressing down on her made her take a small, involuntary step backward, for the first time since moving into Oakwood Estates. The power she thought she had was gone. The street remained quiet as Laura led Alex toward their home, her arm draped protectively around his shoulders. The neighbors watched in silence, the reality settling over them like fog. What had happened wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a reckoning, and Oakwood Drive would never look the same again. The next morning, Oakwood Estates woke up under a heavy silence. Word of the confrontation had spread across the neighborhood overnight. Texts, group chats, and local online forums buzzed with replayed videos and whispered conversations. What had once been the quietest, most polished street in Orange County now felt divided, unsettled, and raw in dozens of homes. Neighbors rewatched the footage from Karen Davis's phone, her voice shrill and accusing, her finger pointing at an 8-year-old boy clutching a telescope. The clip had been shared hundreds of times already, and by sunrise, the entire community knew what had happened. For Karen, the backlash was immediate and relentless, By noon, 3 neighbors had filed formal complaints with the Oakwood Homeowners Association, and Mrs. Garcia's video, showing Karen's harsh accusations, had already circulated online at the grocery store. Whispers followed her down the aisle. In the coffee shop, heads turned when she walked in. Even her closest friends began distancing themselves, embarrassed by what the neighborhood now called the mailbox incident. But Karen's troubles didn't stop at social shame. 2 days later, she received a formal notice from the Orange County Police Department. She was being investigated for filing a false police report. Her video had shown no evidence of tampering or property damage, and neighbors' testimonies contradicted her claims entirely. For the first time in years, Karen, who had once seen herself as Oakwood's unofficial watchdog, found herself isolated and defenseless. Meanwhile, Laura Thompson moved swiftly, refusing to let what happened to Alex fade quietly into memory. As Orange County Police Chief, she issued an immediate internal review, mandating comprehensive bias retraining for every officer on her force. "We have to do better," she told her department during a closed-door meeting. No child should ever feel criminalized for simply existing in their own neighborhood. She announced a new policy requiring officers to verify claims involving minors before engaging in questioning, and she began drafting community outreach programs focused on rebuilding trust between residents and law enforcement. But Laura's fight didn't stop at the station. 3 weeks later, she stood before the Orange County City Council, addressing a packed room filled with reporters, neighbors, and local officials. Cameras flashed as she spoke, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "My son is 8 years old," she said, holding up the cracked telescope Alex had carried that day. "He was called suspicious, interrogated, and humiliated because someone chose to see danger instead of innocence. This isn't just about Alex. This is about every child who deserves to feel safe where they live. And today, we take the first step toward making that a reality." Applause erupted from the crowd, but not everyone was ready to move on. At the back of the chamber, Karen sat rigidly in a simple gray blazer, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her attorney had advised her to attend the hearing to show accountability, but the weight of the stairs pressing against her back made it hard to breathe. She hadn't spoken to Laura or Alex since that day. She hadn't spoken to many people at all. Her house, once filled with weekend brunches and wine nights, now felt cavernous and quiet. Her phone calls went unanswered. Even her oldest friends stopped responding. But beneath her defensive exterior, something had begun to shift. Late at night, she replayed the videos over and over, hearing her own voice, sharp, loud, relentless, seeing Alex's tiny frame trembling, clutching that broken telescope. The guilt she fought so hard to deny seeped into her thoughts like cracks spreading through glass. A month later, the neighborhood held a community town hall in the Oakwood Estates Recreation Center. Folding chairs filled the room, and the air buzzed with quiet tension. Laura stood at the front alongside city officials, explaining the new bias training policies and introducing a hotline for reporting discriminatory behavior. When the floor opened for questions, the first voice to speak was unexpectedly shaky. Karen rose slowly from her seat near the back, her hands clasped in front of her, her usual confidence replaced with something far more fragile. I need to say something," she began, her voice trembling. The room fell silent. She swallowed hard, glancing briefly toward Alex, who sat between Laura and Mrs. Garcia in the front row, holding his little science notebook. "I was wrong," she said finally, the words slow and uneven, as though forcing them past a wall of pride and shame. "I let my fears control me. I saw danger where there wasn't any, and I hurt an innocent child because of it." Her voice cracked as she exhaled shakily, her eyes glossing with unshed tears. "Alex, I'm sorry." The room stayed quiet for a beat. the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Alex glanced up at his mother, his small hands twisting in his lap. Laura placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, giving him the choice, slowly, hesitantly. Alex nodded once. "Okay," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. After the meeting, Karen left quietly through a side door, her shoulders hunched and her expression subdued. For her, the road to rebuilding trust in Oakwood would be long, if possible at all. But for Laura and Alex, the focus turned to healing and reclaiming the sense of safety that had been stolen from them. As weeks passed, Alex found comfort in something unexpected. Mrs. Garcia encouraged him to share his love of astronomy with other kids on the block, and together they helped him start a small science club at Oakwood Elementary. Every Saturday, 4 or 5 children gathered in the Thompson backyard, sketching constellations, examining rocks, and using a new telescope Laura bought to replace the one that had shattered that day. Slowly, Alex's laughter returned. He made new friends, including Jake from school and Mia Garcia, who became his closest astronomy partner. They called themselves the Star Chasers, and for the first time since the incident, Alex began to feel like Oakwood was home again. For Laura, healing came through action. She worked tirelessly with the city council to secure funding for youth programs and neighborhood workshops on cultural sensitivity. She hosted open forums where residents could speak honestly about race, bias, and community responsibility. Change doesn't happen from shame. She told a group of reporters one afternoon, "It happens when we confront hard truths and choose to do better. Together, slowly but steadily." Oakwood Estates began to shift. Neighbors who had stayed silent that day reached out privately to apologize. Families brought their children to Alex's science club to learn from him and play together in the backyard. And over time, the street regained its sense of community, though with deeper awareness, empathy, and accountability than before. Yet, scars remained. For Alex, moments of unease still surfaced whenever he saw flashing lights or heard raised voices. But Laura reminded him, again and again, that he wasn't defined by that day, and that his dreams of becoming an astronaut were still his to chase, on clear nights. Alex stood under the stars with his new telescope, pointing out constellations to the other kids, his small voice brimming with excitement. "See that one?" he'd say, tracing lines across the sky. "That's Orion's belt. My dad showed me that when I was little." And each time he said it, Laura smiled softly, watching her son reclaim the wonder he'd almost lost. Karen, meanwhile, kept to herself for the most part, quietly attending city workshops and volunteering at local youth programs in what seemed like an attempt at redemption. Some neighbors welcomed the effort. Others kept their distance. Trust, once broken, was hard to mend, but in her quietest moments, Karen found herself sitting on her porch, watching the children in Alex's science club, listening to their laughter, and wondering how differently things might have been if she had simply chosen compassion first. And though Oakwood Estates would never forget the mailbox incident, it began, slowly but surely, to grow from it, becoming not just a community of neighbors, but a community of people willing to face uncomfortable truths together. 4 months later, Oakwood Estates felt like a different neighborhood. The perfectly lined sidewalks and white picket fences hadn't changed, but something deeper had shifted. An unspoken awareness hung in the air, as if the entire community had exhaled and decided, finally, to move forward together. What once divided the neighbors now brought them closer, though the memory of that tense afternoon still lingered like a faint scar beneath polished skin. On a crisp Saturday morning, the laughter of children filled the Thompson backyard as Alex's little science club, the Star Chasers, gathered around a shiny new telescope, a gift from Laura that replaced the one shattered on Oakwood Drive. 5 children sat cross-legged on the grass, notebooks open, sketching constellations and examining small rocks Alex had collected in labeled jars. His voice, once timid, now carried with confidence as he explained each one to his friends. "This one's quartz," he said proudly, holding up a tiny fragment that sparkled in the sunlight. "It's like Earth's stardust." The other kids leaned in, listening closely, their faces lit with curiosity and admiration. Laura stood nearby on the porch, watching with quiet pride. So much had changed for her, too. The aftermath of the mailbox incident had made her more than just Oakwood's new resident. It had turned her into a leading voice for police reform and community healing across Orange County. In the months since, she'd testified before city council committees, appeared on local news panels, and spearheaded an initiative requiring mandatory anti-bias training for all officers. She also launched a partnership between the department and local schools, creating workshops to teach children their rights while fostering trust between families and law enforcement. Her efforts earned national attention. But for Laura, the greatest victory was closer to home, seeing Alex smile again without fear. Oakwood itself was different, too. The incident had forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and assumptions. And slowly, the conversations had begun to reshape the community's culture. The Homeowners Association started hosting monthly neighborhood forums, where residents could openly discuss race, safety, and inclusion. Families who had once kept to themselves began attending backyard barbecues and volunteering together at local shelters. Mrs. Garcia became one of the strongest voices in these efforts, leading parent workshops on empathy and inclusion, while Mr. Wilson started mentoring kids in the neighborhood, teaching them about gardening, history, and community pride. And then there was Karen Davis. Her journey had been more complicated. For weeks after the incident, she kept to herself, avoiding neighbors and skipping HOA meetings entirely. The fallout had been painful. Whispers followed her in the grocery store. Her reputation fractured, her friendship strained. But Karen, for the first time in years, chose not to defend herself with anger. Instead, she listened. She attended every city workshop Laura organized. She sat in the back of the community forums, silent at first, and then slowly began speaking, not to justify her actions, but to understand them, privately. She began volunteering at Oakwood Elementary, reading to first graders during story hour and helping with science fair projects. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. Some neighbors forgave her, cautiously at first. Others kept their distance, their trust harder to rebuild. But Laura noticed the changes, subtle but sincere, and though she never voiced it publicly, she respected the effort Karen was making to grow. For Alex, forgiveness came gradually, in his own way and time. One Saturday afternoon during a science club session, he spotted Karen standing quietly at the edge of the yard, holding a tray of cookies. Her hesitant smile trembled as she walked closer. "I thought the Star Chasers might need snacks," she said softly, her voice careful, almost fragile. The kids looked at Alex, waiting for his response. He glanced at his mother, who gave a small, reassuring nod, and after a long pause, he reached out and took one cookie. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice steady. Karen smiled faintly and walked away without another word, understanding more than anyone could say aloud. That small exchange was a turning point, not forgiveness, but the beginning of something new. By early spring, Oakwood Estates felt more connected than ever before. A mural project was launched at Oakwood Elementary, where children painted bright stars and planets across a long brick wall, symbolizing dreams, diversity, and unity. Alex, of course, designed the constellation layout himself, proudly pointing out Orion's belt to anyone who stopped to admire it. At the unveiling ceremony, Laura stood behind him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, watching as her son beamed in front of the crowd. "This is Alex's vision," she told the neighbors gathered, a reminder that every child here deserves to feel safe, seen, and celebrated. The audience applauded warmly, some wiping away tears. Even Karen, standing quietly at the back, clapped softly, her gaze fixed on the mural instead of the stares she still occasionally felt. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Alex set up his telescope in the backyard. The other kids gathered around, their laughter fading to awe as the first stars pierced the deepening twilight. "Look there," Alex whispered, adjusting the lens carefully. "That's Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky." His small voice carried over the gentle hum of crickets, soft but certain. Laura sat nearby, her legs folded beneath her on the grass, watching her son with quiet gratitude. She thought of everything they had endured, the fear, the humiliation, the division, and how far they had come since that day. Alex had found his voice again, the community had begun to heal, and Laura herself had learned that leadership meant more than holding authority. It meant guiding with compassion, even when wounds were deep. Above them, the night sky glittered endlessly, stretching wide and unbroken, a reminder of possibility. Alex leaned against his mother's side, pointing toward the dark horizon. "Someday," he whispered, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I'm going to see them up close." Laura kissed the top of his head, her voice soft and steady. "I know you will," she said. In the stillness of that moment, everything else fell away. The past, the pain, the lingering whispers of judgment, leaving only hope, unity, and the quiet strength of a family and a neighborhood transformed. Oakwood Estates wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it had changed, and sometimes, change was enough to light the way forward. Thank you for listening to this powerful story. If Alex's journey moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more emotional, real-life stories that matter.